In this Icarus supply mission, we needed to get down to a planet, farm and hunt a bunch of stuff, then send it back into space. So first of all, I need to get some basic equipment ready and then find a location for our first base. This involves a lot of picking up stones and sticks and things like that, because we're still quite early on in the game, so we drop with literally nothing. Once I'd made a pickaxe, then I could start getting stone a little bit more efficiently by knocking chunks out of this massive boulder. My friends Name Gear and Arrow were coming to help me on this mission, and they were dropping in just a little bit after me in their own pods. Having a quick look at the map, I could see that the first location for the first shuttle we needed to find was quite a long way away, so I headed over there, picking up basically everything I could find on my way across. I crafted a bow so I could start getting some meat while we were on the way there, but at this point I was pretty terrible at hitting anything. But I did manage to absolutely wipe out this baby deer. Felt kind of bad about it, I was shooting for its mother, but you know, meat is meat. While heading on towards the base, this bear charged right at me and attacked me. All I had was a knife and my absolutely pathetic bow that's made out of twigs and things like that. I put up a pretty good fight, stabbing it in the face a couple of times, but the bear didn't take very long to knock me unconscious. Now at this point in the game, I could either respawn and take the penalty to experience, or I can have someone come and get me. The problem was that there was a bear that looked a little bit like it was teabagging me. I decided to respawn and save my teammates the grief. I hadn't actually travelled that far anyway, but that meant that when I respawned, I lost all of my stuff and was knocked back a little bit in terms of experience. On my way back to my corpse, I had a little bit more luck hunting. This time it's a boar, which I entirely thought was going to run away from me when I started shooting it, but instead it decided to charge straight at me. Luckily, that meant it was much easier to get headshots. When I found the others, they were fighting a wolf, but we made short work of that. Luckily, I quickly found my corpse, and even more luckily, the bear was nowhere to be seen, so I could grab all of the stuff that I'd picked up and made before then. I was minding my own business, mining some oxide, because you know we need to breathe, and I heard something, and sure enough, there was the bear. So I ran over to Name Gear and Arrow. Name Gear decided he was going to fight this bear by standing on a rock, because there's some animals that you can fool like that. Not this bear though, he's smarter than the average bear, and he smacked Name Gear off that rock. We were firing arrow after arrow into this thing, trying to take it down, because the bears really do take a lot of damage if you're not getting headshots consistently. And at this point, I was definitely not getting headshots consistently. With my friends knocked unconscious and me running low on arrows, I decided to go for it with the knife, stabbing the bear in the face twice and managing to take it down. This would be the first of many bears we had to fight in this mission. We got to the first shuttle and that unlocked the objectives for us so we could see one half of this mission, and the objectives were ridiculous. We needed absolutely hundreds of different kinds of vegetables and berries and things. It seemed like an absolutely insurmountable task. I got to work putting the base together at the side of the lake, so we were kind of near the rocket, so when we did manage to grow the vegetables or find the vegetables, we'd be able to load them straight on there. I quickly built a fire pit so we could make sure that we had some warmth, because for the sleeping bags to work in this game, you have to have a source of heat nearby somewhere, and it also meant that we'd be able to cook a bunch of meat as quickly as possible. We needed a ton of wood for the base, because I wanted to make this base a bit bigger than the ones I've done before. We've always been running out of space before, and this time I wanted to make sure we had enough room to have all of the different crafting benches inside. That meant chopping down loads of trees, gathering loads of wood, and making the base fairly big. One of the trees I chopped down decided to come with me back to the base and injure me load and knock a massive hole in the wall. It took me ages to work out what was going on here, but one of the logs had basically rolled down the hill and smashed into the side of the base. I was accusing absolutely everybody else, saying that it was probably their fault that this had happened, but thankfully not that much damage was really done. It was mostly cosmetic. The hit points of the walls and the floor were kind of okay, so I could just use a wooden hammer to fix up as much of it as possible. Before long it was getting dark and the last few pieces of the base were going in. I decided to go for flat ceiling this time because it's way less materials than doing a sloped one. We had some wolves and things like that we'd killed earlier. We had a crafting bench and we had the skinning bench, which you can actually put animals on and then cut them apart to get more resources for them. So things like leather and bone. Once we got everything set up, we put the sleeping bags down, and then that lets you sleep through the night, so you don't have to deal with the darkness. You can just skip right on to 7 in the morning. For some reason, when we came back, we fell out of the ceiling. I don't know what that was about. And then we needed to start thinking about how on earth we were going to grow or find these hundreds of vegetables and fruits. After my earlier success with the boar, I decided to have another go at this one, and for some reason this one just wouldn't die, probably because I was missing it so much. So it started doing a fair bit of damage to me, and I was just firing arrows at it at point blank range, which isn't ideal. Luckily my trusty knife came out again, and that made short work of it. After also having to kill a few wolves that were probably attracted by the dead boar there, I could start carving some of these up and then actually carry the wolf back to base, because if I used the skinning table in the base, I'd get more resources for it. So getting the wolf back to base, I could then put it on the table, and then for some reason on the table you have to select that it is a wolf, as if you're playing Who's That Pokemon, and then cut it up into little pieces, and you get tons of bone, tons of leather, tons of fur, which were all things that we needed to build various things, and we would actually need them for one of the objectives later on. Originally I was hoping that Arrow would be able to build the farms, but he was still a little bit too low level. So I decided to spend one of my points to get the construction recipe for the crop plot, which meant I could start making a little farm. At this point we had no idea how quickly anything would grow. With my first crop plot constructed, I decided to grow my first vegetables, and in this game all you need to do to grow things is to put one of the things that you want to grow onto the actual crop plot, and that means you're actually using up one of those items. And so if you say only get 2 back out of that crop plot, you're only really gaining one thing because you're just getting one of them as the one back that you planted. While carrying a wolf back from another one of my successful hunts, I found another bear attacking one of my friends, so I immediately decided to get out my trusty knife and have a go at it. The bears are really dangerous, especially if you've got a wolf attacking you as well, because one of them can cause quite a serious injury, as you can see I got one there, and then the other one is going to fight you and end up killing you. Thankfully, because there was 3 of us, even though 2 of us were unconscious, we still had another chance of getting in, and the bear was standing proud over my unconscious body. Arrow came to answer the call to try and come and heal us, and he was absolutely terrified of the bear, so was tiptoeing through the forest to try and find us. Thankfully, he did manage to do it without attracting the attention of the various predators that were trying to kill us. After recovering from our injuries, I realised that that first crop plot was taking forever to grow anything, so I decided to make a few more so we could expand the farm a bit. At this point we needed watermelons. That was the first thing I wanted to work on, so I was planting as many of them as I possibly could. Another encounter with a bear and trying to save my teammates. This one was a lot more successful. I knew to stand my ground, fire a few shots into its face, and then use the knife up close. That's what had worked before, and with 2 of us attacking it at once, it didn't really stand much of a chance. Fairly quickly I realised that there was no way we had enough farming plots to do this. Like, we needed hundreds and hundreds of vegetables, so I was set off to mine more sulphur because you need those to make the crop plots. And we made so many crop plots. Our farm was really getting pretty huge now, and it's actually kind of difficult to see some of the crops because of the annoying grass that was growing all through it. I decided I wanted to get some iron so we could start upgrading our tools and things like that, so I headed into a cave, which as far as I know is one of the only places you can find iron. Unfortunately, when you get into a cave, you start getting attacked by these horrible cave worms, and it's basically pitch black in there, so I decided I needed some way of making light before I could go in there. Time to mine some more sulphur, because sulphur can help you to make floor torches. Floor torches made, I could start heading into the cave slowly. Unfortunately, I was kind of placing them and then trying to put twigs into them and lighting them while already being attacked by cave worms. The cave worms themselves aren't that tough. They only take 3 arrows to the face, and their face is really easy to hit because it doesn't really move around very much. They stay pretty still, and they've got a big old face to shoot. So 3 arrows into each one and I could take them down and start to get on with some mining. Mining iron in this is pretty slow. You don't get very much for each kind of swing of your pickaxe, and I think you need something like 40 just to make an anvil so you can start making iron tools. With the iron gathered, I then needed to get the materials to be able to make a furnace so I could start smelting the iron into something that was usable. My first watermelon started to grow now, and I was so disappointed with what we found. You end up getting like 2 watermelons, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, if you're really lucky 5, for each one plot. Now bear in mind, we needed hundreds, and this was really, really annoying. I was kind of hoping we were going to get a stack or something. So at this point I realised that we were going to have to spend absolutely ages growing different crops. Each one of these takes about an hour to sometimes just produce 2, and remember you have to use one of the vegetables to plant the seeds. So that means you're sometimes spending an hour just to get 1 extra watermelon. So realizing that it wasn't going to be quick enough just growing stuff, we decided to start going out on loads of different expeditions in order to try and find more. Now you'll see we've also got the other objectives on here, and this is because Namegear got a bit fed up with just gathering vegetables and decided to go on an expedition over to the other shuttle, which meant that we could get the next set of objectives, which were the ones for hunting. These ones had loads of leather and fur requirements, but that wasn't too bad because we were hunting loads of stuff anyway, but you also needed hundreds of cooked meat. And that was more of a problem because meat's surprisingly hard to come by and cooking takes forever. So this was going to be one of the things that would be a difficulty over the rest of the game. In between searching for vegetables, I decided to do a little bit more delving into caves to get a little bit more iron so I could get things like an iron knife and make them for the others. By this time, I was getting pretty good with the bow. If you went into stealth, you'd sometimes get these one-shot kills on things like wolves, which was really handy, and it meant that we could keep grabbing them, taking them back to the base, and then putting them on a skinning table to get some meat, which we needed to cook, as well as getting a bunch of fur and leather. I decided to use some of the iron to try out the crossbow, which was a weapon that I'd never used before. Ended up being a bit underwhelmed by it. Like, yeah, it is very direct, like there's not much arrow drop at all with it, but the shots are incredibly expensive, being 2 iron a piece, and while you get them back 80% of the time, that's a little bit too expensive to use on most things, and it doesn't do that much more damage to other things than the normal bow and arrow does. At this point there was hours and hours and hours of searching through the forest, trying to find as many vegetables as we could, while waiting for crops to grow. We'd done the berries really easily, that hadn't been a problem at all. But trying to find watermelons and pumpkins and squashes, while Namegear was trying to hunt down loads of different animals to get meat, really started to drag and get a little bit dull. The storm started getting kind of bad around now as well, with trees starting to fall down of their own accord thanks to the high wind and exposure being a problem. But when the weather was okay, we could keep on hunting around in a different forest, trying to find things and getting super excited whenever we caught a glimpse of some pumpkins on the horizon, which meant we could pick them up and take them back to base. There were more hours of trying to find vegetables, of hunting animals, and occasionally having to save each other from bear attacks, especially when the bears were coming out of the lake and kinda terrifying. The farming was really starting to drag. We were trying to grow as much as we possibly could, especially squashes because they were really hard to find in the wild. The bushes just looked like every other bush. But we were fully aware of how long this was taking. The wind started picking up again and I heard damage happening and looked at the base and saw all of these numbers pinging off the roof. That was really scary. So we ran in to try and work out what was happening, and the wind was actually tearing the roof apart. So I quickly had to get out the wooden repair hammer and start fixing up all of these holes to try and hold the base together. With the base safe and the weather a little bit better, we were still getting attacked by bears fairly regularly. Thankfully, by now I was at the point where I could kind of handle a bear by myself. I had loads of health from eating different things and had some better armor, so they weren't quite the threat they used to be. By now we were done with berries and watermelons. We'd got all of the ones we needed of that, but we still needed squashes and pumpkins, and we needed so many of them. Annoyingly, to plant more pumpkins, I had to actually take pumpkins out of the rocket that we were trying to send stuff away in, just to get the seeds to plant more so they'd grow and we'd be able to hopefully get more in an hour's time. We spent even more time just searching around the forest trying to find as many stupid squashes and pumpkins as we possibly could. It's so frustrating when you feel like you might have farmed out an area of the map, and then randomly you'll just come across a little patch that you'd missed somehow, where a bunch more have grown. At this point we decided to call it a night. We'd had enough of searching through the forest for things. We had quite a lot of different vegetables, but it was getting super late in the real world, so we decided to stop there and save it for another day. Heading back into the game the next day, something terrible happened. Previously, any produce that we'd managed to put onto the rocket seemed to be refrigerated in some way, so none of it was spoiling. When we reloaded it today, everything was starting to rot. So things that we'd completed were fine. Even though the berries and the watermelons were starting to rot, it didn't seem to matter. We'd still completed that objective. But now we had less squashes and pumpkins than we had previously, and it was ticking down all the time, because the way spoiling works in this game is each stack has kind of a timer before one item in a stack will spoil. So the more things you have in there, the more are going to start spoiling. Now, they were spoiling faster than we could find new ones, which was a real problem. So we really had to step up the farming efforts to try and get ahead of it and make sure that we had loads of them growing at once, so then we could put them all in the rocket at the same time. This was all massively disheartening because it felt like we weren't really making any progress, we were just treading water. And to make things worse, the storms were getting even stronger, and we started to see some lightning in the middle of them. While the storms were going on, we pretty much had to constantly be repairing the building because they could take about 10% damage just from the wind in an instant. So I was constantly running around with the hammer, trying to get some oxygen where I could, trying to have a drink where I could, get some food where I could, and then go back to fixing the bits of the base that were breaking. Farming had become basically industrialized. We were farming so many things and trying to make sure that everything was organized as efficiently as possible in the rocket so that things wouldn't spoil too much. Obviously, we were still having to mess around to try and get seeds and things like that. It was becoming quite a problem, especially because every hour you would suddenly find how many of each thing had grown, and still sometimes you would only get like 2 squashes or 2 pumpkins, which just wasn't enough in an hour to replace the things that had been spoiling. In between vegetable gathering, I was still hunting as much as possible, wolves, deer, whatever I could find, sometimes boar, sometimes even buffalo and things like that, just to make sure we could keep on getting more meat and cooking it, because remember, we still had to make 600 cooked meat. The lightning in the storms was starting to become a problem because it set fire to a bunch of trees right near our base, so NameGear decided we had to try and put this out. In the game, there's an item called a fire beater, which is this kind of fan thing, that the idea is that you can hit things near the fire or things that are just starting to be on fire and put the fire out. When you're trying to fight a forest fire like this, it's really not very effective at all. Luckily, the storm passed and the fire was kind of dying down, and it was far away enough from the base that we stopped panicking and had to go back to trying to grow more produce, more pumpkins, more squashes, all of these kind of things. Now, bear in mind, all of that time that we were dealing with the fire, with the storm and everything like that, there's still produce spoiling constantly, which made it feel really kind of defeating when you looked at the totals and realized we were losing vegetables a lot of the time. Now we had 44 different gardening plots, all trying to grow the same things, try and grow things all at the same time. We still needed a bunch of pumpkins, and then we were still going to need a bunch of squashes. But we decided, which I think was definitely the right move, to try and get all of the pumpkins done first, because then once that objective was completed, we wouldn't have to worry about pumpkins spoiling anymore. Then we could move on to the squashes. While I kept tending the farms, the others decided to make a big trek with all of the leather and cooked meat and fur that we had back over to the other rocket, because then they could go and complete those objectives and we could focus on just getting that farming done. It was around now I started getting insanely bored of watching this farm because there really wasn't that much to do. We couldn't gather enough to deal with the spoiling. We'd gather some every now and then, but we were getting less and less every time. So I decided to start building a massive tower, because why not? I was just waiting for crops to grow by now. Building a ladder vertically up, you can weirdly go all the way up to the height limit without having to worry about it not being structurally safe, which gave us quite a nice view of our little base and the lake that we had made home for this entire game. After many hours of farming, we were just trying to occupy ourselves. Like, even the storms weren't bothering us too much. We'd got incredibly good at hunting by now, to the point where killing things seemed like absolutely no big deal. We'd built a massive tower to the sky. We just needed to wait for these crops to grow. Arrow, very handily, had decided to cross the entire map and found a bunch of pumpkins, which meant that we were getting very, very close to having everything complete. Me and NameGear were doing anything we could to try and pass the time, including having little archery competitions whenever we saw something a long way away, in which I made this absolutely spectacular shot, again killing a tiny little deer. I'm very sorry about that. After this, there was much more farming. Remember, these crops take an hour of real time to grow. So it was taking us a very long time, but the end was in sight. Now Arrow was back. We had a bunch of different materials. We had a bunch of produce turned up, which meant that we could finally complete this stupid mission and get everything loaded up. putting the last pumpkins inside this shuttle was such a good feeling, and seeing it disappear, knowing that we won't ever have to choose another mission like this ever again. Of course, now that we've finished our mission, the only thing we had to do was go back to the shuttle, but it's kind of become a tradition amongst us to burn everything down to the ground that we've been working so hard to build up for the last few hours. With the base starting to burn, we could be on our way. And it does feel kind of cathartic to burn all of this stuff down, because it had become our home for the last kind of maybe 6 or so hours we'd spent doing this, but it was all done. And, you know, we tried to make sure that we had some water and oxygen for the return journey, which is another mistake that we've made before. So we left the lake behind. Name Gear was still occasionally shooting the odd animal on the way, but we could just start sprinting our way back to the shuttles. Once you've finished a mission in Icarus, all you need to do is go back to the shuttle that dropped you in, so go back to base, and then you can each leave one by one and get your rewards. As the host of the game, I always kind of like to watch all of the others leave first to make sure that they definitely get the kind of mission complete thing before I go, and it's kind of nice watching all of the shuttles take off again. I really like that. For some reason, Namegear had a bug where he couldn't see a shuttle, it was invisible to him, so I had to kind of help him get in.
Yep.
And with that, we were done. It had taken about 6 hours to complete this entire mission, which was way too long. I never ever want to do another supply mission again. But we did end up getting a bunch of points for it. You get these kind of workshop points which you can spend towards getting gear that you can take with you on every mission. That's really cool, and we're slowly working our way towards being able to get suits which will help us survive for a lot longer. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of this, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, turn your notifications on, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.